Where does power reside in the US at the moment? If you were to name one person who is the most powerful person in the US, who would it be?
A.G. Sulzberger.
He's the publisher of the New York Times.
That's right. The 5th generation hereditary monarchy.
Curtis Yarvin, thanks for joining us in this.
Great pleasure. And your name is, I remember it, but I forgot.
Oh, Angus Colwell.
Angus Colwell, of course.
That's my, yeah, thanks for joining us in the sort of upper respiratory tracts of the Excel Centre. How are you finding London?
I'm finding it, well, lovely. Well, you know, I had a little thing the other day where my some friends put in the Excel Centre into their Uber address, and they found themselves indeed in front of the Excel Centre, which was a rather dodgy computer learning shop in somewhere in in the not so nice part of London, and we had a good laugh about that. I was in Whitechapel with someone, and apparently it was very tasteless of me to suggest that Whitechapel, home of Jack the Ripper, I believe, as it turned out, a Pole.
Was it?
So they just discovered, they've confirmed through DNA evidence that he was a Pole. I mean, a Polish Jew, actually, but a Pole. You know, my suggestion that it should be renamed Brown Mosque, you know, was not taken. But you know.
Well, I'm not sure it'll catch on. But they do say, I'm sort of interested in your view of coming from the US.
Yes.
And you know, we have a cliche here that, you know, when America sneezes, Britain catches a cold. We're at the art conference right now, and that's obviously a big exchange of ideas over in the US.
And the art conference feels very Americanized to you.
Well, this is what I was going to ask.
There's kind of an American vibe.
Yeah, we haven't tended to do sort of symposiums in this country, but I was going to say, sort of in the US, MAGA is kind of intellectually ascendant, and in Britain it seems like we have a sort of government that's kind of straight out of the early 2010s at the moment. Do you think, are you sensing anything that Britain might be a couple of years behind on a sort of intellectual rightward drift?
I think that there are some ways in which Britain is actually ahead. And you know, there are so many subtle, whenever I come to London, you know, I'm always reminded of the kind of subtle and intangible ways in which London is still the center of the world. Like, there's a few ways in which that's still true, and I think one of the ways is that there is much more unity between intellectuals and power structures here. It is much more normal to see sort of Oxbridge historians and classicists and so forth actually involved with, you know, the strange structures of political power here, such as it is. And there's just sort of, you know, Britain is a place where the tradition of intellectuals with a will to power on the right as well as the left has not been lost. And the tradition of American sort of post-war conservatism, which is sort of, you know, cowering in the face of its, you know, gigantic world-striding Sauron-like adversary, is like to be very hobbity and just to want to be left alone. And so even when Elon Musk is storming up and down Washington, smashing things to bits, you know, his fundamental desire is to be left alone. He's not really there to build things. He's mad at the government because it wouldn't leave him alone, because it basically kept being like, you can't build rockets because, like, you know, it might make a loud noise that would scare the fish. I mean, you've heard the thing about the sharks. He basically had to do a whole bunch of paperwork, basically, because if his rocket lands in the ocean, it might kill a shark.
Right. Okay.
If the shark is right here, you know, right, you know, and
so he's gone into government for a quiet life.
He's going into government for a quiet life, which is a peculiarly American delusion, and so you know that you know, when you you know, well, one of the things I delight in explaining to Americans is, of course, you know the metonym for America, right? It's Uncle Sam. Yeah. But do you know who it was before Uncle Sam?
No.
Brother Jonathan.
Okay.
You've never heard the phrase Brother Jonathan?
No, I've never heard it.
And people actually in England are named Jonathan fairly regularly, but nobody in the 19th century. Like, it's a dissenter name. It's basically because it's a Hebrew Bible name. It's like Ezra, or, you know, something. All sorts of kids in an American, you know, kindergarten will be named Ezra, at least if it's an upper class place.
Yeah, we'd have that.
Americans won't be named Nigel.
But British people aren't being called Nigel anymore. It's a name that I think 2 babies were called Nigel last year.
Wow. Yeah,
So
if you meet an American named Nigel, his parents are from Bermuda or something. Yeah. and so, it's this very long, deep cultural interchange. But in any case, basically, the American right has traditionally, and maybe this is changing a little bit, but changing very slowly, has a will to be left alone. They love to be libertarians, and so on and so forth. And the idea that they would actually have the right or even the duty to wield power is very, very foreign to them.
Okay.
And that's something you see a little more of here, which I love.
Where have you seen it?
Where have I seen it? I see it even just the people who support a conference like this. This is higher end than, for example, the closest equivalent, which is NatCon in the US. There are sort of more, people like Paul Marshall, or, there's a whole, he doesn't seem to want publicity, but there's another founder who has like a crypto fortune who's very, very good at this. And they're good at basically, the purpose of philanthropy is to turn money into power. And when you understand that, you can do very well with it. But when you don't know what you're doing in anything, you're not very likely to be successful.
Okay. Let's talk about power and the new US administration. Where does power reside in the US at the moment? If you were to name one person who is the most powerful person in the US, who would it be?
A.G. Sulzberger.
He's the publisher of the New York Times.
That's right. The 5th generation hereditary monarchy.
Why do you say A.G. Sulzberger and not the man with the nuclear football? Or
because if I were, just as a thought experiment, let's say I was, another way to ask that question is to say, if I wanted as much power as possible, and I was a devotee of some deranged cult, such as a Scientologist, and I could put a chip in one man's brain, it would be A.G. Sulzberger's. And the result would be that the Times would basically sort of inject kind of subtle pro-Scientology memes into everything. It couldn't come out and come out straight for Scientology at once, but it would sort of engineer a climate that was more and more pro-Scientology over time. And this is pretty much the way, slowly but surely in this Gramscian way, the U.S., spent most of the 20th century becoming the communist country that it is now. And so, and that was the strategy followed by, the sort of the great foundations in the early 20th century. It's a sort of way of, it is the way of kind of steering an oligarchy. Of course, we now have someone in the Oval Office who, has, although, Donald Trump was never really a CEO of much consequence. I don't think he ever ran an organization of more than 30 or 40 people. He has, the Napoleon of rockets, by his side, and they are actually trying to run the U.S. government in a way that it has not been run since the passing of Franklin Roosevelt.
And that Steve Witkoff plays into that as well, right? He's the man that is sending out a real estate guy to sort out the Middle East.
Yeah, I guess I would say when I talk to people in the new administration, they're like, everyone is very clear, and some are a little disappointed in this. They're like, policy is being run out of the Oval Office right now. If you don't have access to the Oval Office, it is being run really in a top-down way.
Do you think that's happening in the first presidential term?
Oh no.
Where was power being?
Power still resided in the hands of the establishment. He just sort of thought that he could come in and the system would work.
So the establishment has lost power?
No, they basically feel it threatened, and they have primarily inertial power, and so that, it's like saying, where does power reside in the USSR in 1987? Is it in the hands of Gorbachev? Is it in the hands of the party surrounding him? It's a bit of this monarchy. It was certainly monarchy versus oligarchy in the days of Gorbachev, and the Soviet regime was overthrown by monarchy, by the top, by Gorbachev, who did not intend to do what he did. It's sort of like but of course, the Soviet Union was quite bureaucratic, quite oligarchical. It was not the Soviet Union of Stalin, which really was this, very top-down controlled system. It wasn't even the China of Xi. There were all these networks and these stagnant structures. And it turned out that they just had no will to fight back. They had the inertia of power, but they sort of lost the will to power, and faced with any sort of will to power, they just collapsed.
How do you, so if we talk about the Oval Office, do you think that the power is obviously emanating out of the Oval Office, but is power sort of coming from the president? To me, it seems like there might be a similar situation with Joe Biden, which is that the president is oblivious to a lot of maybe what's going on, but is ultimately sanctioning it and is sanctioning his advisors to act in a certain way.
No, this very, like Joe Biden was genuinely, oblivious because he was genuinely demented. And actually, one of the things,
that's true.
I think there's always reason to be sad about historical events because nothing is ever perfect. And, it would have been lovely in certain ways to see the demented president followed by an alcoholic president. That would have been epic. Actually, some people are like, it's not alcohol, it's more like Xanax. Yeah. I'm not an expert, right? But there's definitely that vibe. When she's and she seems very relaxed, and so, but no, I mean, as Donald Trump, as young as he once was, no, but does he have the sort of the will to power and the will to command? He does, and he's surrounded by people that kind of understand this and are willing to do his will. And one of the, astounding things about the Trump-Musk relationship that really, it just shows the genius of Musk is okay, we know Musk knows how to command, but does he know how to obey? And, the powers that be would love to drive a wedge between them. They would love to make Trump jealous of Musk. And both of these guys are just too sharp to let that happen. And so actually Musk is very content to basically leave Trump as setting the direction. Trump somehow, he was completely unable to delegate in his first term. Somehow at the age of almost 80, this old dog has learned a new trick. And suddenly he can delegate. And he can get things done, when I'm not that close with the administration actually, but when I talk to people, they're just like, the command is coming down. Somebody used a funny term for me. They said the command is coming down from the highest level. And if you know 20th century history, that's exactly the way you were supposed to talk about Hitler in the German government.
Right. Okay.
I don't think he knew that. But they're basically do things, move as hard, as fast as just exercise authority as if you had it. And so the effect is sort of which of course Franklin Roosevelt did. Franklin Roosevelt was really the CEO of the U.S. government from 33 to 45, especially from 41 to 45. And, when he dies, he's created this incredible team. He appoints this complete mediocrity, Harry Truman, as his successor with, I think, no one will ever know, but I think his very clear intent was to basically leave, have his empire survive without an emperor and let the monarchy become an oligarchy, which it did. And for a while, that was a very capable oligarchy. It conquered the world, right? And but no one, including Republican presidents, not even really Nixon, certainly not Reagan, has basically tried to make the thing work from the top down. Even when Barack Obama tried to make the State Department do slightly different things than it wanted to do, it was just that's where the term blob came from. It came from Ben Rhodes, who was Obama's speechwriter. Right. And I can barely tell the difference in ideas between the old State Department and Ben Rhodes, but evidently it's there because he was very frustrated with them. So when you, and then suddenly, Trump comes in and his attitude is just I'm just going to behave like I'm the chief executive of the executive branch. And if people tell me to stop, I will stop once they, the Supreme Court comes and puts the handcuffs on me, probably, maybe. As you might have seen, he just declared himself the living Constitution, and, people are just right? And he has people around him that sort of have some idea of what to do with it. They have some idea of how to take command. They're still very far from having a clear vision of what they want to turn the thing into, but they know what they want to smash, and they're actually quite capable of smashing of it until, and just daring the supposedly Republican, but well, I guess we'll see, Supreme Court to stop them.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know. I didn't think it could be done. I didn't even think it could be or
Well,
would be tried.
Let's surprise our viewers, because they would have, if they've been listening so far, they might have assumed that you would have sort of written on your Substack pro Donald Trump. You didn't. You wrote last year that you were pro Joe Biden.
Well, yes, because the French, proverb. I'm going to butcher the French, so I won't even butcher the French. Step back to leap farther is essentially. It's like when you're ready to actually do the thing and succeed, you should do it, but you should not even go near the Rubicon unless you're ready not only to cross the Rubicon, but then go to Rome, go to Naples, and ideally end up in Cape Town.
Okay.
Right. And until you're ready to really do it, you should not do it, because as Saint-Just says, who makes half a revolution digs his own grave. And the most important thing about this Trump revolution is that once you start, you can't stop. Because once you stop, your supporters will lose all confidence. Your enemies will be very emboldened. There was a very significant moment when they found out that one of, Elon's, based little 180 IQ helper kids had, I think he'd posted some very hateful tweets. And their first reflex was, this guy's got to go. And then they were informed by many people, this is a huge mistake, you're killing yourself. And they reversed and they rehired him.
True, but Elon Musk put it to a vote on Twitter.
But he knew what would win. I mean, you can have
but some would say that he should have just done it.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you're going to win the vote, it's actually even stronger to have a vote.
It was a little bit of trolling.
It was a little, no, when you know you're going to win the vote, you should absolutely have a vote. Take Bukele in El Salvador.
Yeah.
Bukele in El Salvador has a 90% popularity rating. The other 10% is, 8% of that is gangsters and their families, and 2% of that is liberals.
Yeah.
And he's like, he can have votes all day long. He can have as many votes as he likes.
Well, if you look at that as a state that is going through some kind of revolution, or it seems ready.
That's a genuine regime change. That's actually a genuine regime change. Bukele is fully in charge of the Salvadoran state.
Yeah.
Which Trump is not even close to being. Right. And so that's a different story, really. But of course, it's an inspiration. My God, he took the most dangerous country in the world, basically, and it was just like, we are going to make it safer than Canada. I don't know what that says about Canada, but I walked through the main square of the main historic district. I didn't do this as a test. I just happened to have my laptop under my arm, naked, not in a bag, and I'm just like, it feels fine. And I walked through this in the main square of San Salvador carrying my MacBook Pro, and nobody frickin' bothers me. Yeah. When I went to the equivalent in Sao Paulo, they were like, do not even take your cell phone out of your pocket here.
Yeah.
There's
that thing I think in Singapore.
Yeah.
To go up and get your food, you leave your phone on the table.
Oh, really?
To show that it's occupied.
Totally normal. Totally different, way of living. And once you've been in a completely safe, or Japan, once you've been in a completely safe place, you don't. And so, it's basically, there's still many areas of the U.S. that are low-grade war zones. There are many places that I would not walk in the daytime, let alone at night. Some of that's gotten better, some of it hasn't. The government of the United States still does not know to within 10 or 20 million even how many goddamn people are in the country. You're still, it's this huge state of disorder, chaos, and financial and economic, the problems are enormous, and, the theories of solving those problems are currently very inadequate. But they're making a start, they're hitting the right people, they're swinging a wrecking ball through the right things. The dissolution of USAID, if they get away with it, is just I could never have imagined they would even try that, let alone succeed in it. And that's, as a target, that's coming as close as anything could to my vision of an American Gorbachev doctrine. If you know the Gorbachev doctrine.
Go on.
Well, Gorbachev said to the Soviet Empire, hey, this is not actually socialist brotherhood. You're an empire. Hey, East Germany, these guys who govern you, yes, they have German names. They speak German. They were born in Germany, but they're actually our guys, so do whatever you want with them.
I of course knew that. That was just for the viewers. So you're sort of vision of government and regime change is very much driven by efficiency and sort of is that unfair?
Well, efficiency in the broadest sense, really. And one of the things I kind of disagree with, and I don't know Elon Musk, by the way, one of the things that I kind of disagree with them on is like, it's a very sort of, it sort of reeks of what my favorite American writer, Albert J. Nock, called economism. And it's like efficiency in the broadest sense is the right thing. But the thing is, when you model, and I do believe there is a very close and true and penetrating analogy between a government and a corporation. But the proper way to think of that analogy is not that the purpose of a corporation is to bring in bring in as much revenue as possible, or even to make as much of a profit as possible. The goal of a corporation is to maximize the value of its assets. And the assets of a country are like the people and the land. And the amount of especially when you look at the American people, the extent to which they're being sort of left to rot and grow weeds. I mean, here, in the glorious UK, you have there's this lovely Twitter feed called UK Aesthetics, YOOKAY. It's lovely. And you have basically the Boris way of Deliveroo economy, which is essentially, it's essentially a slave society, because a slave society is one in which the working class is not connected via the social graph to the consuming class. And so you're basically importing these people who ride around on these electric bikes, making and delivering your curry. And you don't know them, you could never know them. They speak enough words of English to deliver your curry. And meanwhile, you have this whole native working class that's just, left to molder in tower blocks and, smoke skunk and...
on benefits.
We've got
5.3 million people, I think, on
active work benefits. That's why it's so important, because, they're on benefits, so they're useless. So it's very important to import hardworking slaves.
I think that is a criticism that's increasingly made in conservative circles over here.
And some labor circles, perhaps, even.
Yeah, no, definitely. So one of the things that you have said about democracy is that it's weak. But something that its advocates would potentially say is that there is a self-correcting mechanism. Do you think that's true?
Well, the word democracy, of course, is the most Orwellian word of our time. As you may know, for example, the formal name of North Korea is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That is 3 synonyms for democracy in one place name. So when you mean democracy in today's world, what happens with these meretricious words is they switch their meanings. It's kind of an Amsonian ambiguity. So when you say, when I want to explain the traditional Aristotelian division of government into monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy, I'm like, for monarchy, think CEO. For oligarchy, think meritocracy. And for democracy, think populism. So do you mean meritocracy is self-correcting or populism is self-correcting?
Well, I guess the self-correcting mechanism seems to be elections. So,
there was, have you heard of Yes Minister?
Yes.
Indeed.
Sir Humphrey.
Sir Humphrey, right? So the relationship of sort of post-war meritocracy, post-war the civil service state, let's get really obscure here, the Richard Crossman state, is essentially, it sort of goes back to the very Platonic theories of, say, Walter Lippmann earlier in the, if you know the name, he was
the theorist.
Earlier, read the book Public Opinion. Basically, already by the early 20th century, it is realized that if you actually just put the people in charge, do you know the Bhagwan speech?
No, I know we had the Northcote Trevelyan report, which sort of
Yeah. Well, that's way earlier, of course. So that's earlier than in America. So the American equivalent is the Pendleton Act, which is 1880s. Northcote Trevelyan is 1850s.
I think something like that.
Yeah. And there's this whole sort of course of history where basically, what Americans realize after what some call the Civil War is that, if you essentially let populism be in charge, you get third world governance, you get massive amounts of corruption. It was called the Great Barbecue when it wasn't being called the Gilded Age. The idea of letting the people be in charge is this wonderful YouTube clip. Obviously, I have no brief for this fellow, by the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. He's on, and he's in a very elevated and extremely stoned manner. He's like, democracy is government for the people, by the people. But if the people are retarded, the government is retarded, right?
Yeah.
And so, you sort of had this compromised system where you can still call it a democracy as long as the people are following their leaders, and so you get this system that is basically there to instruct the people in what they should believe. And it's sort of self-controlling in a way where, there's some limits on just the absolutely crazy stuff that 20th century media can get people to believe. And so within that, it's a little bit self-correcting. Has it self-corrected on the matter of immigration? No, I don't think so. No. That's been unpopular, since Windrush 101, right? It's never been popular. And so, to say that the people are a significant check on the madness of the meritocracy is, I think, just not true. I think the people are much weaker than the meritocracy, especially in, democracy as a force is a spasmodic force. This is what an election is. It's like democracy has no power between the elections. Then ideally in an election, it has all the power. In fact, it has almost no power because actually it's like, I was used to put things in English terms, as I would say to Americans. I'm like, there is clearly a difference between the powers of Elizabeth I and Elizabeth II. Yet on paper, they're really almost the same, right? And yet one of them is really the queen. She's a tutor. She's in charge. Yes, do they execute Mary Queen of Scots without her permission? But maybe that's a sign of things to come. She's not her father, but she's really in charge of the country. She's really a national CEO. Elizabeth II, is a crown Kardashian, right? She's a celebrity. She's a ceremonial monarch, and of course, the first ceremonial monarch is, George I, right? And who is installed precisely by the Whig oligarchy, precisely so England will not have a real king.
Mm-hmm. Because there's the king over the wire. Yeah.
Right. And
would you have been a Cavalier or a Roundhead, do you think, if you were in the...
the thing is, I would automatically say Cavalier, except that my hero, Carlyle, of course, being a Scottish Protestant, is a devout Roundhead, and his hero is Cromwell, who establishes a monarchy that he considers far more sound than that of the Stuarts. It's funny because when you look at, I don't know if you've read Clarendon's Great Rebellion. It's a lovely book. And one of the things is you find is that the dysfunction on both sides is exactly the same in the English Civil War. The left is, it's all, Yeats, the worst of men are full of passion and energy, while the best lack all conviction. The right, or what passes the right, is all squabbling with each other. It contains figures who are, Edward Hyde is basically, he's an IDW type. He's like a lot of the people here. He starts out as a leftist and then becomes a disillusioned centrist, essentially. Then you have people who are really, to some extent, radical right-wingers, but they're always infighting. They're always, fighting with each other, and they just don't have this energy of this fanatical desire to rule. And of course, the Roundheads are just full of these utter fanatics, and who prove completely incapable of governance. And so you get the reign of Oliver the Blessed, who Carlyle admires him, so I have to admire him too. And he was certainly a strong and capable leader.
Well, I was going to move off British history, but while we're on it, I guess there is a question that, have you seen the debate that's been flared up again recently, happened about 6 months ago, the Churchill debate, the Winston Churchill debate?
Oh, well, the problem is we had this American who came over, Darryl Cooper or something, who's really, he's directionally right, in some ways.
What do you mean?
I think he's very right to ask questions about the Second World War, but he's not asking precisely the right questions.
What are the questions that should be asked?
Was it good for the Jews?
Okay. I mean, no.
There you go.
You can't sort of ignore the coincidence that it was not good for the Jews. It was not fought for the Jews. It was fought, in fact, by, Roosevelt and Churchill are both, somewhat anti-Semitic gentlemen, more, Roosevelt. He didn't really care about the Jews. And actually, Hitler's basic position, and he said this many times in his speeches, is like, well, I think America is run by the Jews, and so I'm going to hold the Jews hostage to fend off America, and because everything is about race, the Jew-controlled Americans won't dare to touch us. Hitler is wrong about a number of things in this area. Hitler actually had a very good intuitive sense of reality within the scope of what he understood, but of course the first time, let alone America or England, he was not in Paris until he conquered Paris. He's wildly clueless about the way America works. The America that Hitler describes in his speeches seems to be 21st century America rather than 20th century America, which still retains very much enough moral fiber to, send him to his death. And, but furthermore, to the extent that there are influential Jews in America, there are very influential Jews in America. There are people like Frankfurt and Brandeis, who are just top quality individuals, amazing people. One thing Hitler doesn't understand, however, is that these are German-speaking Jews rather than Yiddish-speaking Jews. The Yiddish-speaking Jews at this time are, like my ancestors, are still up and coming. The German-speaking Jews are fully assimilated. They are fully assimilated to the WASP culture. They are more WASPy than the WASPs. They are more English than the English. They really want to, become, assimilated into Harvard world. And their feeling about the Yiddish-speaking Jews of Central Europe is not very positive. Actually, these groups had racial slurs for each other. And so when Hitler is like, I'm going to hold all these Yiddish-speaking Jews hostage to fend off the German-speaking Jews like Frankfurter and Brandeis, who are not really the powers behind the throne anyway, it's sort of like taking a bunch of Serbs hostage to like coerce the Croats. And the Croats are like, well, technically we are kind of the same, in some ways, but like to German-speaking Jews, Yiddish wasn't even a language. They considered it debased jargon. And so
I must confess my ignorance in this area, and I hit the comments section is sort of provoked into a discussion about it. So I don't have enough knowledge to come back at you here.
You don't really know your Jews.
Which is probably the fault of the mediocre journalist class at the moment.
But it was not good for the Jews, and it was not started to save the Jews. World War II was not a crusade to save the Jews. World War II, actually, if you look at the period, what people thought they were fighting for on the Atlantic side was they were fighting to defeat the Axis German-Japanese plot to take over the world. Okay, there was no such plot. There was never any such plot. Maybe if they'd won, there would have been such a plot, but there was no such plot. The German-Japanese plot to take over the world was exactly as fictitious as Holocaust deniers think it was. But the Holocaust was completely real, right? So, there's just the set of ironies there is immense. Like World War II is an immense ironic tragedy that needs to basically be unpicked very, very carefully. And I don't think a good history of it has been written. And it needs to be written at a level of like incredible depth and professionalism, which all due respect to Darryl Cooper, but he's kind of an amateur.
Onto I guess something that's being spoken about today is the talks over Ukraine. You wrote just before the invasion, I don't know how tongue-in-cheek this was, that Russia should be given a free hand to order Europe and control Europe.
Well,
do you still think that, or was that tongue-in-cheek? I'm not sure.
it was a provocative idea. I said a similar thing. Somebody asked me. I was talking 3 years ago to Thomas Meany, if you
the editor of France.
Yes, and he did a sneaky thing, which I still have not forgiven him for. He introduced himself as a historian, so we spent 3 hours talking about history, and then it turned out he was there to write a freelance piece. Okay, fine, fair game, right? But one of the things I said to him, which provoked a certain amount of criticism, is he asked me for my thoughts on Israel. And I said that to me, Israel is a foreign country. And, it is really nothing to me as to whether they give the whole place to the Arabs or they, I think I said, carve out a new Semitic empire from Marrakesh to Tehran. Either way, it would certainly be Kino, right? And so, when you basically take, the way I would basically phrase this, in terms of Europe and the Ukraine is that, FDR, as you may know, I think in 1937 made this speech. It was a private remark to journalists. He denied it, but he was lying, where he said America's frontier is on the Rhine. So is America's frontier still on the Rhine 80 years later? Could we say now, the Biden administration or the Victoria Nuland world has been behaving as if America's frontier is on the Dnieper or the Dnipro? I love dead naming the Ukraine. And on the Dnipro, right? Is America's frontier on the Dnipro? And where is America's frontier anyway? And a true neutralist would say that America's frontier is the territorial waters ending, 200 miles offshore of the Atlantic. So, off the coast of Nantucket. I mean, legally, in terms of like the ancient idea of nation states, America's frontier is our territorial waters in the Atlantic. I think that's a little too much isolationism and a little too much neutralism for me. I think that actually I favor a very firm policy against Mr. Putin. I think we should draw a red line in the sand, in the literal sand, and we should say, Mr. Putin, beyond this line, you cannot come. And we'll go nuclear, we'll go thermonuclear, we will do anything to defend that line in the sand. And I think the right place for that line is the natural border of the Anglosphere, which is the English Channel. And by the Channel, I mean the Channel. Okay, Hitler crossed that line. It's little known. Hitler took Sark. Hitler took Jersey, not New Jersey, but Jersey. He took Guernsey. Okay, Mr. Putin, okay, Sark is ours. You are not taking Sark, okay?
So Sark, you can have Paris.
Sark will remain English forever, but if you want to clean up Paris, if you want to make the Paris Metro look like the Moscow Metro, if you want to make Saint-Denis look like Saint-Denis, is it my problem? Is it my problem? Now, I mean, let's think about ways in which it could be my problem.
Yeah.
So, one of the problems I have, people think of me as an American patriot, but I'm really an international Jew. And one of the problems I have with America is it's quite simply the wine. You could make amazing claret in California, but instead they make this sweet, jammy stuff. And I drink French wine. I'm a Bordeaux man, and so.
You try any natural wine? We're in East London.
Oh, no. That's not. It's fine. It is what it is, but it's not wine. It's like grape beer, right? Not natural wine. Just the wine the way it's always been made in Bordeaux. And so, what would make me change my mind about this? So, as an American, I sort of depend on the products of Gascony, right? And if if I were to hear some intimation that Putin's plan for France included, say, we're going to take all these, Cabernet Sauvignon grapes and we're going to make vodka out of them, which could be done. I'm not a vodka drinker. I might change my tune on that, right? But actually, I really don't think it's my problem.
Well, it might
be your problem. You might like to, would you like to go? Do you want to go and do the drone warfare thing?
Yeah.
Right, you can do it, not my problem. Reorganize the Wehrmacht, do Barbarossa 2.0, take Moscow,
I guess the idea that...
Make sure you film it, because that shit's got to be on YouTube.
You'll do very well on Spectator TV. But the idea that Russia should be given
be given the passive, no.
But
I believe in the
point here, which is
multipolar international order. I believe in the classical international law, the law of nations of Vattel, and not the ersatz international law of the last 2 centuries. I think we need to get back to a multipolar world order.
True, but I was going to ask about capabilities. So you may have a different read on this than me, but surely the past 3 years of the Russian invasion has basically proven that the Russian military is broadly useless. I mean, these drunken generals that can't really move beyond this.
It's absolutely the opposite. The 2 most powerful fighting forces in the world today are the Russian and Ukrainian armies. One of the reasons why the Assad regime in Syria falls is that some clever, spooky type people had the brilliant idea of taking these Syrian rebels who are led by this leader who has, it's the equivalent of his resume is incredible. It's like having gone to be both Harvard and Oxford. He started out in ISIS and then he joined Al Qaeda, right? Incredible jihadi resume. For some reason, they decided, and they may be right, that he's actually a good jihadi, and so they gave him a squadron of Ukrainian, drone, killers, and he just went through a 20th century army like this. Actually, militarily, it is not that Ukraine is a protectorate of Europe. It is actually that Europe is a protectorate of Ukraine. There is no fighting force on earth that could resist what that war has turned both the Ukrainian and Russian armies into. And when they send Ukraine, not even, because basically they have learned in a way that, when they send Ukrainians basically for training, it used to be thought, we'll take these ragtag native, Ukrainians, the Ukrainians are basically natives, right? And you send these natives to England or to France and train them in modern NATO warfare, and they come back and you put them on the battlefield, on the Dnipro, I guess, and they're useless. Because they're basically trained in 20th century warfare, and what they're experiencing is 21st century warfare with horrifying stuff, right? And so actually, there is the only force on earth that could defeat the Ukrainian army is the Russian army, and the only force on earth that could even start to stop the Russian army is the Ukrainian army. And if they join forces, basically, y'all better learn Cyrillic.
I'm trying to think of the sort of jigsaw that I have now from them to join forces.
What's hilarious?
What would the external threat need to be?
Libs, homosexuality. I don't know. One of the funniest things about this brutal, ironic conflict, right, is that for a while, until the sad death of Prigozhin, I love that guy. Until the sad death of Prigozhin, the main, the hardest core military formations on both sides were being fought by basically, troops of Nazi mercenaries funded by Jewish billionaires.
The Azov.
Yes, the Azov and Wagner.
Okay.
Both run and funded by Jewish billionaires, right?
Okay, I'll read about that later.
Kolomoisky and Prigozhin, right? Prigozhin. If you want to see that war in action, Prigozhin, it's hard to find because it's but people keep deleting it. Prigozhin, who is quite a character, being a Jew, quite a character, actually got into the entertainment industry, and he made a couple of movies, and one of them is called Best in Hell. And it is a fully high production values feature film about the war in the Ukraine, scripted, and all of the actors are like actual mercenaries. And so, they're doing shit on camera that they do every day, and it is real. And
we'll put that in the link, I think.
Yeah, find a link to Best in Hell. It's on there if you're not violating sanctions in some way, shape, or form. There is a version with English subtitles, but it's an amazing film. It may be the best war film ever made.
Yarvin, thank you very much.